Hey gang, welcome to FYA Fishing. As always, I'm your host, Ed Nelson. Today we're going to talk about something a little different. This right here, spinning tackle. More specifically, loops and twists in your line. What causes them and how can we prevent them? Now last month I had the privilege of fishing with a great spinning reel fisherman, Mike Hook'em Hard Brensfield, and I learned a lot. Hopefully today we can get out on the water, spend a little time using the spinning reels, and learn exactly how to spool and maintain our line so that we don't have a problem with loops. So you guys sit down, relax, sit tight. I'm going to put the boat in the water and we're going to learn some spinning savvy. Hey gang, as you can see, we're out on the water. Now, before we get into throwing a spinning rod, there's a couple of basics I want to discuss with you first. And it's probably the primary cause for your loops and your twists, and that's proper spooling. Now, for years you were told when you spool a reel, you put a pencil through the hole, have somebody hold pressure on it, and then you stand in front of them and spool up your reel. And for a bait caster or conventional reel, that works great. For a spinning reel, that's not proper procedure. What happens with fishing line is when it's made at the manufacturer, it goes on these spools hot. And when it cools in the direction of the spool. So it has a natural loop to it. Now this is 100-pound monofilament, so it's going to display what I'm saying very, very well. But if you notice when I pick up on it, see all these loose coils? That's line memory. That's the direction of this line. When I spool a spinning reel, if I turn this spool on its side and I pull it off this way and then put it on this way, as you notice, I created a half knot by taking it off the spool sideways and then trying to flip it onto a spinning reel, because it's going to go on and then turn before it goes on the spool. All right. Now you can imagine how many half knots are going to develop every time you turn the reel on and you bring on a half knot. How many half knots are going to develop as you make 100 or 150 turns to get all that line on your reel. All right. And all lines do it. For example, this is a much smaller monofilament. This is 12-pound test. I'm not sure if you can see it, but when I pick up on it, again you'll see those same series of loose loops. The directionality of the line, or the line memory. Now, this is braided line. This is Excel 20-pound braid. The most limber of all lines. Alright? But it's still, you'll notice when I take it off the spool, when it comes from the factory, even braid, if you can see that, still has loose memory loops. Alright? So when we're spooling a spinning reel, the proper way to spool this is going to be to take your spool and sit it on the ground like this. Not have somebody hold it, but sit it flat on the ground. And what you want to happen is, if you notice this spinning reel, when I turn the handle, it spools or brings line on clockwise. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to put this on the ground. Excuse me. I want to sit this on the ground so that when the line comes off, like this, it's coming off in a counterclockwise direction. That means that that loop now is going to be flipped from a counterclockwise direction to a clockwise spooling. Alright? And I'm going to do it just like this. Alright, we're back. As you can see, I've changed my spool out. What we're going to do now is we're going to take this 12-pound monofilament and fill this spool. I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. What I've done is I've placed my spool on its side. Alright? I've run the line through the first guide and then down to my spool. And I've tied it on. Now, we're going to start off with the line coming off clockwise, just to see what happens, all right? And this is a clockwise spin here. I go to the top of the hole, I won't have any problems. All right, and we're going to spool some. Maybe 8 or 10 turns. Oops. And we'll see what happens. I got caught there on the line holder. But hopefully I can wrap this around the edge of that line holder and it won't hang anymore. Let's see what happens. There we go. Now I'm going to make 4 or 5 turns, and I'm going to stop real quick. Look what's happening. See these twists here in my line? That's because it's coming off clockwise. It's coming off this spool in a clockwise fashion, and it's flipping over trying to get onto this spool. So how do I fix that? I'm now going to flip the spool over to a counter, so it's coming off now counterclockwise. And let's spool some more now. Let me get that loose loop out of it first there. I got that memory there to work through. Once I get through that, I should be fine. There we go. Now I'm going counterclockwise. Now when I pause, notice, no loops. nice loose loops, no twisting. That means I'm not developing any memory. So if I was to continue to spool this, as you can see, even if I stop now with all that lines upon here, I still have no loose loops. See how that works? Alright? So remember, the loops and the twists in your spool, in your spinning reels, usually start right at the beginning. A lot of it we put on ourselves just by improper spooling. Remember, come off your master spool on the end in a counterclockwise rotation, so you spool clockwise and you won't develop those knots like I showed you earlier. Alright? Next we're going to look at some of the things that happen while we're fishing that cause loops. Alright guys, now for the fishing part of it. What do we do as fishermen that causes those loops and knots? Alright? One of the most common mistakes that I see is when we cast. I'm going to make a cast right here and show you what I'm talking about. The second most common reason for developing loops in your line is right here. Notice I haven't closed my bail yet. I want to show you something. I just made a cast, and if you notice my line is laying in those same loose loops that were on the spool. Now if I take my reel handle and click it over, what I'm doing is, I don't know if you can see it, but there's now a loose loop laying on top of that line right, on top of my spool right there. Alright? What happens is, I put that loose loop on, maybe bring in a couple of more as I turn it, and then the line tightens up and I put the tight line on top of that. Alright? Now if my next cast doesn't go further than my first cast, I may introduce some more loose loops on top of that. Or maybe even worse, on the next cast I don't get all the loops out and I catch a fish, which means it's going to bury that line. So what's going to happen is I have loose on the bottom and then tight on top. And that will eventually start to knot together. And then eventually, obviously it all tries to come off. We've all seen it at one time, this big wind knot, what we call it. Where all those loops try to walk off at one time. Alright? One way to combat that, let me twist the boat around real quick so I have room to cast. Current is twisting me into this bank here. Alright? One way to combat that, excuse me, is going to be, when I make my cast, I'll do it again, always close your bail by hand. Alright? This does two things. It eliminates the drawing on of a loose loop because I don't have to spin the reel to get the bail to close. And the second thing it does is it saves my bail spring from slamming shut. So I'm going to get longer life out of my bail spring. Alright? Then I'm going to lift up on my rod tip and reel down to my lure and then begin fishing. Alright? And if you notice, when I make my cast, my arms are out here. And the reason for that is, it helps me tighten the line up before I reel it in. And I'll do it in one fluid motion so you can see it. But I'll make my cast and I'll leave my arm out here. I then close my bail, lift up, and then reel down to my bait, and now I'm ready to fish. But I never had that line laying loose in loops and brought onto the spool. It was out, I lifted it tight, or I closed my bail I should say, I lifted it tight, and then I reeled back down to my bait and began fishing. That eliminates those loose loops coming on. Alright? So that's the second most common problem, is closing the bail with your hand. Alright? The third most common problem is using baits that twist in the water. Burning a spinnerbait's a bad one. A lot of spinnerbaits, when you burn them, if the blades have too much thump for the weight of the head and the speed you're retrieving it, the bait will want to spin in the water. Inline spinners are the same way, they'll spin in the waters. Drop shot rigs, fish deep, will spin on their way up. When you're reeling them back up to cast them again, they will actually spin in the water. Alright? Lures like that inherently twist up your line, and that twist gets into your line and messes up your spinning reel. One way to combat that, very simple. Add a swivel to your line. A swivel to your line will allow that bait to spin, because it's going to spin anyway, without it twisting up your line. Alright, so that's something else you can do. If you have an inherently twisting bait, go ahead and just come up a foot or 18 inches above your bait and add a swivel in line. Alright, don't put it so far up, like my leader here, I'm probably running about a 10-foot leader here. Alright, if I was to put that swivel here where the braid meets the fluorocarbon leader, I would be apt to, as I'm reeling a fish in, trying to reel that swivel through my tip guide, and that'll crack your tip guide. So put it far enough down the line where it's in a position where you're not going to accidentally reel it onto the rod, alright, and crack your tip guide. But a swivel will definitely eliminate a lot of that. Alright? Having said all that, spinning reels, by nature, are going to twist your line. That's what they do. The theory in a spinning reel says this, all right? When you make a cast, your line goes out. When you bring it in, you twist your line. So as I'm bringing it in now, I'm inherently twisting my line. And the theory is now, when I make my next cast with my spinning reel, all that's supposed to come out. So even though I bring it on with each retrieve in, I also release it with each cast out, but that math very rarely works out even. You very rarely get all the twist out, bring more in, get it all back out again, bring it in, get it all back out. It very rarely works out that way. Normally, you leave some twist and some memory behind. And when you do that, it begins to develop. All right? And it's going to happen. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. The inherent nature of a spinning reel twists line. Now, there's a couple things you can do. One of which is what I do. I use braided line. Braided line does not develop memory near as quickly as monofilament does. I know, it's very expensive, but it's a lot more durable, a lot more sensitive, and it's very expensive. With a high-end graphite reel like a graphite rod like a Johnny Morris Signature, all right? I don't want to put monofilament line on here anyway. This is a high-end graphite rod, all right? It's extremely sensitive. If I add monofilament to it, it's like having a rubber band, all right? But if I use the braid, I maintain that sensitivity. I don't lose anything in the rod, all right? How do I combat the visibility problem? Like I said, I run a fluorocarbon leader, all right? Fluorocarbon has about the same refractive index as water does, but it's extremely invisible. So when it gets in the water, the fish can't see it like they can in the braid, okay? So I guess you're wondering why I don't spool all the way with fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is a denser line than monofilament, which means it develops twist even easier than monofilament does. So all those twists and knots you get with mono would be probably twice as bad with a full spool of fluorocarbon. So I get the durability and the sensitivity of braid with the lack of memory, and the only thing I have to worry about twisting is my leader. And obviously my leader goes out on every cast. So by the whole leader being out on every cast, it's going to release that twist no matter what, no matter how bad it twists up on the way in. It's going to release it on the way out. All right. Having said that, if I am fishing drop shots, inline spin or something like that, I do run a swivel. I do prefer to have a swivel on there. I don't want to twist my braid up any more than I have to. Obviously, it can handle memory better, but I still don't want to twist it. I'm still trying to combat that twist as much as possible. All right. All right. Now, say we've been out fishing all day long. We're using monofilament. We're starting to get those twists, those loops in our line, those little knots, like when it hits the water. I make a cast, for example, and before I can reel it in, all this section through here is all twisted up. You know what I'm saying? And you have to sort of pull it out, feed it up like that, and then reel it onto the spool again. Your line's just developing a lot of memory. All right, that's going to happen. Here's a little trick that'll save your fishing day. I'm going to reel my bait in, whatever I happen to be fishing with, and I'm just going to cut it off, just like that. All right? Now, I'm going to release my bail like this and let my line hang loose, and I'm going to pull some line out. Let's say 10, 15 feet, and just throw it in the water, just like that. All right? Now, I've got my trolling motor set on about 30%, and I'm just going to troll. But I want to troll away from my line so that my line never gets in the blade of my trolling motor. We're just going to troll just like this. And as I'm doing it, if you watch, once this boat gets to going, notice the line just coming off on its own. The friction of the water alone is enough to pull the line off your spinning reel. All right, if it's sticking a little bit because of the line twist, give it a little bit, and then feed it back. Give it a little bit, and feed it back, just like that. And now you can see, now that I've got that much line, now it's really flopping off fast. All right, and what I want to do is I'm going to head upriver now and troll out about a cast's worth of line, maybe a little bit more, behind the boat. Just let it troll out. Remember, we have no bait on there right now. It's just the spinning line. All right, laying flat in the water, and it's the friction of the water grabbing the line that's actually causing it to come off the spool. All right. Now, for me, the way I cast, that's about a cast's worth right there. I'm going to stop the boat and let it drift forward while I do this. I, again, close the bail by hand, and you notice the line's pulling itself tight because of the friction in the water. Now I'm just going to grab it up here and reel it in under tension. Just like this. And here's my line back. And this is where we started out at. Now, what did that do? If anybody's ever tried to roll up a garden hose in the yard, or an extension cord, if you leave it wadded up at your feet, and you try and roll it up in nice pretty loops, all it does is twist, right? But if you stretch it out across the yard, and then you roll it over your wrist, or you roll it up on the ground in nice pretty loops, you can roll it in loop. As it comes around, you roll it, and it keeps on rolling, nice pretty loops. Why is that? Well, what's happening is, when the hose and when the extension cord is wadded up at your feet, you're trying to take the twist out of it, and you're forcing that twist further down into that knot of hose or knot of extension cord, and it can't release itself. But when you stretch it out across the yard, as you're reeling it in, the end of the hose or the end of the extension cord is flipping around and unwinding itself. It's unwinding all the memory. That's the same thing you've done with your spinning line. All right, and you can see how loose that's hanging right there. What you've done is by stretching it out across the water, it's laying on the surface of the water. All right, it has no friction on it whatsoever. So as you're winding it in, holding friction here, that coil is untwisting, and you're actually untwisting your monofilament or untwisting your fluorocarbon. You're releasing all that built-up memory, and you have nice, smooth, straight line in your reel again. Now you go back to fishing, and you won't have all those loops that you've developed throughout the day. All right. Now, having said that, I would highly recommend at that point, when you go home that night, it's probably time to change your line. All right. And that brings to my final point when it comes to spinning reels, is changing line. You have to change your line on a regular basis. All right, spinning line does not last forever. As a tournament angler, I change mine rather regularly, but for the most part, for the average fisherman, if you fish every weekend, I would say you need to change your line at least once every month or so. All right. If you fish like I do and you fish tournaments, I change mine for every first day of every tournament. All right. If I use it that day, I may cut into it, splice. I may pull a cast worth off and then fish it with fresh line the rest of the next day. But for the most part, fish it or change it at least once every 2 months, no matter how much you fish. All right, because when you bring that memory on, it gets stuck there. All right, and by releasing it, you're going to have a lot fresher line the next time you go. All right, and that fresh line is going to do a lot better. It's going to have less nicks in it. That memory stresses the line. It causes weak spots and it causes breaks. All right, and it just causes plain old aggravation. So by changing your line on a regular basis, you're going to have a lot more fun the next time you go out on the water. All right, guys. As you can see, sun's going down. My day's coming to a close. All right. Remember those tips. First of all, proper spooling, most important. Remember, it's very important to properly spool your reel before you even go out on the water. It's absolutely paramount. All right. Secondly, when you're on the water, remember, open and close the bail with your hand. All right. And always remember, if your line does get tanged up, all you got to do is troll your line out. And, oh, excuse me. Oh. I need a huge one, but I'll take it. Oh, there we go. Well, how's that for an ending, huh? 48.7 degree water temps. Ain't a monster, but I'll take it. Remember, guys, proper spooling, proper casting, and change your line regularly, at least once a month. All right? My name's Ed Nelson, and this has been Spinning Savvy. I hope you had as much fun as I did. I'll see you next time.